LaFara here. Now, before we get started on today's segment, I wanted to invite you to a webinar that I have coming up here on Sunday, May 14th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, where we are going to be looking at how to overlay tarot into the natal chart. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked at tarot and astrology side by side, but they are very complementary systems when we start to put this information together. So in the 90-minute webinar, we are going to first start by finding out what cards go where. How do we link these archetypes up to our natal chart placements? And then we're going to look at a few example charts to kind of see how these different cards play out in different people's lives, and where there might be, some blessings, but also some challenges. And usually it's a little bit of both. Now, of course, one of the big parts of this webinar is for you to be able to take this information into your own natal chart so you can understand more about yourself, your loved ones, and if you do client work, you can then allocate it when you're looking at their natal charts and be able to share this information forward. Now, this is going to be a sliding scale-based, donation-based webinar where you can pick how much you pay. And if you have a little less to give, that's okay. And if you have a little more to give to help support the community learning process, that's okay too. But just know that I appreciate whatever is being able to be donated. So to do that, go on over to energeticprinciples.com and click on the webinars portion of my page, and it can take you to the registration link that will lead you to the Stripe checkout. So, all right, everyone, who is ready to hear all about Jupiter and Taurus? Now for our segment with Wade Caves.
And may the stars be with you.
All right. Welcome back to the Energetic Principles podcast. And today we have a very, very special guest returning to the program, Wade Caves. Thanks for joining me again, Wade.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, you might remember Wade came on to talk about Saturn and Aquarius.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
That was hard to forget. Maybe not that podcast, but that transit.
Yeah, it was all over the place for quite a while. I think we're still living with some of it. So, yeah, Saturn in Pisces is already starting to kick up some interesting themes. So, that ship is moving on. But, here we are. We're getting ready for what's going on with Jupiter today, right?
That is right. So our program here today is talking about Jupiter moving into Taurus, which is, whenever a slower mover moves anywhere else than where it's been, it's somewhat of some big news here. And so we are going to be talking about Jupiter and Taurus. So Jupiter's wrapping up its Aries stay, which felt pretty eventful in many regards. Any insights into Jupiter in Aries? Seeing it on the tail end?
Yeah. Oh, right. Well, yeah, we are on the tail end of it now, and it's starting to, wind things back up. It's been an interesting period with Jupiter and Aries, that it tends to be a period of typically it tends to be periods where seeds are sown for economic strength, but it tends to not be evenly distributed. So the thing with Jupiter and Aries is it tends to touch a few places and really kind of bring a lot of room and excitement to a very select set of themes. So Jupiter and Taurus should be a little bit more, I think, democratic and a little bit more broadly experienced, although there's risks and rewards that come with this as well. But yeah, Jupiter and Aries is also, I think, the heat that we had in Aries contributed with Jupiter's passage to the runaway inflation experiences that we've had, and the impact that many everyday households have had. I mean, you can see potato chips now that used to be $1.29, $3, $4, $5 in the markets anymore. It's impacting all of us, and I think in many respects causing us to question how much we consume. In many places we find that maybe we're not spending more in terms of a grocery bill, but we are taking home less and finding in some cases that we're doing okay. That won't be the case for everybody. I mean, there are places in the world where grain manufacturing and what was going on with agriculture, this situation where you've got a primary export for a developing nation, it has a big impact on how those folks are feeling it. So it's been not an evenly felt kind of transit, and I'm interested to see what happens when we swing away from Mars's sign, because so much of this transit coincided with Mars being in Gemini, Mars being retrograde. There wasn't as much shift as we normally get. Mars only was in 2, maybe 3 signs during Jupiter's passage through Aries. And then when Jupiter moves through Taurus, there'll be a lot of movement because Venus, its dispositor, will be traveling with the sun. So there will be at least the full circle. So different.
Well, that's fascinating. Even some of the things you just brought up right now really tie into some themes with looking back at Jupiter in Taurus, and especially when Jupiter was in Taurus, when Uranus was in Taurus too. So maybe we'll circle back around to that. But before we get too far into like talking about all the meat of Jupiter and Taurus, Wade, tell the people who you are. What?
Yeah. Who? Well, I didn't make it onto the Ninja Turtles. I didn't make it onto the Elite Power Rangers force. And so I grew up and decided to be, and I wasn't part of Captain Planet's team either. So, I had to kind of represent a very different energy and become an astrologer. I don't know why I thought about like all the boy bands that were actually TV shows just then, but anyway, I'm an astrologer. I live in Brooklyn. I've had a number of careers working in financial planning, investment planning, in the retail industry, and then moved into working with infrastructure and data science and consulting. And that was a very exciting time in my life. COVID, kind of shook some things up for me in particular. It shook up things related to my work life. And I was able to make the leap into being an astrologer full time. So it all, in that sense, it kind of worked a little bit in my favor. So I've been practicing astrology full time since then, since 2020. And I work principally with, I teach horary astrology. I teach astronomy through the School of Traditional Astrology. I work with traditional methodologies, but I like working in pretty much every branch of astrology. So horary, elections, natal astrology. I've been spending a lot of time with mundane astrology lately. That brings me a lot of pleasure and joy as well. So that's a little bit about
wonderful. Me. Yeah, I love some good mundane astrology, right?
Yes.
Astrology of the world. And you got to sign up for Wade's newsletters because, I watch you get inspired by, some sort of, world event, and all of a sudden you want to know about it, Wade's going to tell you about it. He's going to come out in this impromptu newsletter that will tell you everything that's going on. And they're really fascinating to read.
Thank you.
And I remember even just the first time I ever was introduced to you at the San Diego Astrological Society. You were going to come speak. And you weren't even there yet. This was like a couple months in ahead. And I remember our vice president at the time, Loda Shah, who is just this fascinating, just love this man. A story of his own. But I remember him being like, oh, I have booked Wade Caves, and the excitement in his eyes of like what you were going to bring to the table. And he's like, this is a smart young man. Like
he's very sweet. I remember him well because he was so helpful in planning and helping me coordinate with the SDAS.
Yeah. So it was an exciting introduction to Wade, and you did not fail to deliver. So
that's sweet.
All right. Well, let's get you just said you spent time in like financial like planning and I feel like this Taurus business.
Well, it seems that way. I mean, the work that I did was I worked for a retailer, and I would help them figure out, like, if they said, I got $2 billion to spend over the course of a year, $2 million to spend, or $100 million to spend, $500 million to spend, how would I spend it? And so my job was to build, some kind of compelling case around how that money should be spent to make more money, but there's a little, that's not entirely different from Jupiter and Taurus. Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
bit.
it's fascinating thinking
Mm.
about that. Not even knowing that about you, but thinking like, I want to talk to Wade about this. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about well, just to give some brief introduction of Jupiter in Taurus. That ingress is going to happen on May 16th here,
Yeah.
2023. So we are only I think when this episode airs, it will be about less than 10 days out from it ingressing, but it's going to be there in one straight shot all the way through Taurus until May 25th of next year, 2024. So there won't be any of this kind of dancing in and out. We are just going to, in true fixed Taurus fashion, we're just going to see it all the way through.
Yeah, and I don't know if this would help any of the listeners. I'm going to assume somebody wouldn't know this. The determination about whether Jupiter turns retrograde or doesn't, and how fast it moves. Do you remember how fast it moved through Aquarius? I mean, it just went,
just like blink of an eye.
Yeah, blink of an eye. It's very similar with Aries. How quickly it's moved through, but Taurus is going to be fast as well. The way that you determine how swift it's going to be is how close it is to the sun when it begins. So if it's very close to the sun when it makes its ingress, the planets are always fastest when they're next to the sun. So if it starts fast, it could possibly move through the entire sign before the sun brings itself back around to a retrograde kind of issue. Or if usually there's going to be a retrograde in the middle, but it's technically possible that it can just zip right on through and have to come back into the sign later because it was too fast. Yeah.
How fascinating. That actually brings up some questions that were asked between a few astro friends of mine a couple months ago, and you just answered that question when we were trying to figure out.
Yeah, well, it's very helpful, I think, sometimes to think about, when you work with electional astrology, and mundane astrology is the same, natal astrology is the same. The placement of a planet is like a seed being implanted somewhere. And when the planet moves very quickly through its sign, it's an indication of confidence. It's an indication of ability. It's an indication of usually speed and motion is indicative of being in good health. But if it is going almost too fast, you also get the sense that this certain thing that's been seeded might not be long living. It might not be lasting, or if this, maybe for instance, you actually planted a seed back when Jupiter was in Pisces, and so now Jupiter is coming to the sextile, or maybe it was when Jupiter was in Cancer, and now Jupiter is coming to this, the sextile from the other side, or another Earth sign, then it's a trine. Whatever the deal is, the seeds that were planted there, if it's moving too quickly through it, it means also the harvest that we get back from it isn't long lasting as well. That it might be something that's very potent and very strong and possibly more valuable, but it will not linger. It's not going to be this drawn out kind of effect. So the speed of a planet is helpful in terms of reaping and sowing.
How interesting. Because immediately when you're saying that came to mind, just thinking back to Jupiter's time in Capricorn, and especially all the grand conjunctions with Pluto.
That was a busy time. That was,
and it just, well, I mean, obviously the whole world, whole world changed with that transit, but it did stay the course. Did it go in and out? I think it
I don't think
it was much like Taurus, where it stayed the course in there. And so I was just thinking, getting to this trine position from that time she'll be interesting in my mind. But so we're talking all about Jupiter, right? Jupiter is the star of today's program. So let's think a little bit about the nature of Jupiter. And so when I say Jupiter, Wade, what does that mean to you?
Well, the first thing I usually think of is Santa Claus. And I know it sounds like a joke, but I think it's a perfect caricature of a Jupiterian type of character. Jupiter is wide, not lean. It is the image of abundance on the land. There's something about Santa Claus that is always pictured, big, happy, jolly, big belly laugh, rosy cheeks, wise, not young. So this is always, it's wisdom and generosity mixed together. And we have this whole thing about belief in Santa Claus, which is itself a very strong Jupiterian term. So Santa Claus to me seems to be like a really good metaphor. There are so many feelings of excitement that are evoked in individuals when they see images of Santa Claus. But, also when you think about it a lot, Santa Claus, it throws a really good question on the value and role of belief. It throws a good question on, where we create images to celebrate instead of placing, like the parents, for instance, are the ones that are creating. What's so wrong with children being grateful to their parents? Why did we have to create a fictional character to place gratitude upon? And so I think that there's an interesting image that comes with that. But Jupiter it's a hot planet. It likes to keep things in motion. And also because it's a moist planet, it's a planet that is known to bring cohesion, bring things together. And so it has a reputation for, kind of bringing life and vibrancy and color to things. The medical astrologers would say that Jupiter is the type of planet that never worries the mind. It doesn't produce anxiety. It doesn't produce despair or distress, but it can complete havoc on the body. It can cause all sorts of issues with the blood. It can cause issues with the liver. It can cause issues also just with, the principle of accumulation in the body, full stop. So whether we're talking about, it could be weight, but it could also be things like tumors or any kind of growth or things that come into the body and accumulate without understanding maybe that a boundary in some way has been crossed, if that makes sense. But typically, Jupiter, feel free to interrupt me. Also,
no, I'm just thinking, I'm just imagining this, the things that go unchecked in the body, and like the boundary being crossed, and then it just gets, whether that is dealing with, obesity or like a fatty liver, like think about the fatty liver.
Exactly. Those things are completely united.
The Santa Claus theme was very interesting to me, and you talking about especially Jupiter, having that, because in my mind, Jupiter is always moving forward, right? That's the kind of the idea of expansion, and you're gonna get something out of Jupiter, right? Because it's not a stagnant sort of energy. And so I think about Santa Claus and the whole theme of, are you gonna get a gift, or are you gonna get a lump of coal?
Well, and also when Jupiter moves over, Jupiter is about expanding, but if Jupiter tries to expand something that is in a period of stagnancy, that isn't necessary. I mean, Jupiter is a buoyant energy. It likes to lift us up. It gives us, some upward momentum. But if the upward momentum still isn't enough to lift somebody into action or to embrace principles of expansion, then Jupiter's passage over that individual's or that set of circumstances is going to be inclining towards wastefulness and indulgence and lethargy, and possibly, as a result of just a feeling of, ick, like things are kind of just, kind of growing incursively towards itself, and not because it's trying to expand, but if there's no out to expand into, then what happens is it takes that impulse and reaches inward, and sometimes it can create a bit of a funny set of feelings. I mean, at its extreme, Jupiter brings themes of hyperbole and, arrogance, wastefulness, exaggeration, all those kinds of things. The superior planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, they tend to cause their own downfall one way or the other. I mean, Mars and Saturn, it's obvious how they might do this. Mars usually is going to be some violent theme, rash, impatience, anger, blah, blah, blah. With Saturn, it's going to be just, operating out of fear, full stop. Whereas with Jupiter, there can be an operating out of false hope, or, operating and assuming that luck is enough, or that things will just work out, not enough attention to detail. We expand bigger and bigger. I mean, how many companies go under because they got too big? That was the only reason.
Yep.
Expansion isn't always a good thing. And that's not really what our economic models respond to. Our economic models equate growth with good. And so there's already, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but when Jupiter makes its ingress into Taurus, it's got to hit Pluto by square. It's going to hit that opposition or square again with Mars as a T-square with these. Yep. And, that is a good signature of ballooning and balloons getting popped, and a crisis of confidence that can come off the back of that. You're never going to have a hard aspect with Jupiter that doesn't invite doubt.
Yeah.
there are some industries very susceptible to that, like
Yeah.
banking, for instance.
Well, and that's the whole thing with that's what drives the stock market as a whole, right? You know,
Yeah,
you throw
believe.
some doubt in,
Yeah, yeah,
things can go
absolutely.
topsy-turvy, depending on, who mostly maybe who pulls out, how things start moving, right? Because I think that seems to be the theme here is
Yeah,
that something is progressing, whatever that might mean,
yeah,
it's progressing in some way, which can be good, can be
yeah.
challenging. But yeah, those are all great, themes to start thinking about Jupiter here.
Mm,
So any, like, if we think about personal versus mundane,
mm.
Jupiter, especially mundane, you've been journeying that mundane life here
Yeah.
recently. And so where do we see Jupiter in the mundane world, in the
Yeah, I
collective?
think it's very similar both in natal and mundane applications, but this is the planet of the philosopher, of the spiritual leader, of the judge, of courts, of justice, a natural sense of justice. And I think where Jupiter shows up, both in a birth chart and in mundane astrology, is going to be talking about these themes of human advancement.
Yeah.
Um, I'm hesitating. I don't want to say expansion of consciousness because I remember when I started out with astrology, that phrase didn't mean anything to me. I'm like, what do people mean by that? And they would throw it out like we are all on the same page about that. But I think what it points to is better ability to put pieces of the puzzle together, or to attempt to put pieces of the puzzle together. It doesn't matter what puzzle we're looking at, it doesn't matter what the pieces look like. The idea is that we're beginning to amalgamate and make sense of more and more. And you can see that in mundane, transits. I would expect anything, with this Jupiter and Taurus, I'm going to expect it to be touching on institutions that have some relationship to this sense of growth. So wealth or banking, which is all about growth, economic systems, what's going on with federal reserves. I'm expecting to see some shifts in,
Yeah.
the like global accepted global currencies, for instance. I mean, there's been so much talk. The US was like the reserve currency. This idea of a reserve currency, it's very earth sign. I'm not trying to associate with Taurus so much, but earth is always the reserve element.
Yeah.
This is the thing we can fall back on. It's the thing that cannot fail us. It is so centrally tied to those same themes. Jupiter moving into Taurus, or on a collective level, there's going to be shakeups that I think we can anticipate related to wealth and money systems. But also, I'm expecting change. Jupiter in mundane charts, just in general, no matter what sign it's in, it seems to be making some influential decisions in the world of global religion, what's going on in the courts, international courts, what's happening in regional courts. Jupiter naturally signifies famous and notorious people. So when we have like a really, like during the Me Too movement, I believe Jupiter was either in Scorpio or I think it was in
Scorpio.
Scorpio.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also feel like I can't quite remember, but I feel like there was also a theme of a South Node kind of thing going on around then at the same time. But what we learned during that movement were so many individuals who were household names were becoming household names for very different reasons
Yeah.
at that time. And so Jupiter transits can really bring attention onto the wealthy, people in the upper classes.
Yeah.
It can be bringing themes about class-based systems to the foreground anyway. Like Jupiter rules the gentry, right? So that old phrase, the gentry, it's like the nobility, the people in the court, people who, aristocracy, for instance. And
Mm-hmm.
so the principle of gentrification, which is happening in urban environments all around the world, is also a Jupiterian theme. It is the expansion of the Jupiter archetype in places not designed for it, not built for that, and built for other uses and other purposes. So this is an example of where Jupiter expands beyond, healthy reach and begins to make the changes that it makes, but it also, as a result, it stirs up conflict. And so Jupiter being a hot planet, it's not free of, initiating the potential for conflict.
Yeah. And you even bringing that example up right away in my mind, just thought about thinking about, um, land and property
Yeah.
and, these bigger Jupiterian figures, whether they're, like a lot of times we see them in today's world in larger companies or corporations or,
Mhm.
and people just coming in and like, I'm just going to buy this, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to buy this. And like, there's nothing left for, your everyday folk to
Mhm.
have a slice of that pie when
Mhm.
it comes to like land and property and, at least that's what just theme with, and think about the Airbnb themes that are going on. And then, so that definitely came to mind there,
Mhm.
or in my mind. But yeah, so,
Well,
thinking
I
about,
also think I'm just
yeah,
going
go
to
ahead,
add on to that, just
add
with the
on.
Jupiter, Pluto's in Aquarius, and that's an
Yeah.
air sign. Jupiter and Taurus, it's an earth sign. I think you're spot on about, real estate and physical earth, but I think this square with Pluto is also going to be kicking up things about air rights and space rights. And,
Mm.
we are starting now. I don't know if you noticed this, but on Twitter, instead of saying what device you tweeted from, it's saying what planet you tweeted from, which,
What planet?
yeah. So if you go on Twitter right now, you can see that something was tweeted from planet Earth or the ISS. And I think the idea is to prepare the possibility of tweets coming from Mars or the moon or places that are off of Earth. One of the questions that we don't have answered for ourselves is, what does governance in space look like? I know that we're not ready to answer that, but right now it's big corporations that are making their way into the space race. It's not nations anymore. So what happens when an Amazon or a SpaceX or some other company, essentially a company with corporate values, corporate politics, corporate ends, becomes the first pioneer effectively into space? How much of the scene do they get to determine, and so I think there's something with the square that it's going to be challenging the vertical notion of right
Mm.
to rule.
How interesting, like talk about the free market of space.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
What do
And
you
I think it's going to be a really big thing when we've got Jupiter and Leo in opposite to Pluto Aquarius. That'll be,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So
And then
that's
we're
like
gonna,
what, 4 years from now, but yeah.
and it will come soon enough. And yeah, that's a fascinating thing to think about because we don't, I mean, we're here on Earth, right? Like, how many of us
We're
are
here
even
on Earth,
thinking
for
about
better or
that
worse.
or care about? I know. Gravity has kept us here. We are
Yeah.
mired in what is right before us.
Yes. Yes.
But it is something to think about, I mean, to some extent.
Yeah.
Most of us lay people can't think about that. But preparation, when we think about the bigger picture, it's a very
Yeah.
Jupiterian thing. It's
Yeah.
like maybe this doesn't matter right now, but this
Yeah.
could matter in 50 years. And if you're not aware of this, more detached grand view, you can
Yeah.
find yourself amongst changes that come later on that,
Yeah.
yeah, so that affect everyone.
Hmm.
So, well, personally, I don't want to live on Mars or tweet from Mars, or I don't even
I
tweet, so
don't think
I'm
I
not.
would either, but if it was safe and it had a good track record, I would definitely be
you
interested
we
in like
we
space
we'd find
tourism.
we'd find way to
I,
Mars.
yeah, I don't know that I want to go to Mars, but I want to be out in space. I want to see what that's like. I just feel
Yeah,
like I want to see Earth from the outside. I don't care about anything else. The Earth and the moon. I mean, this is my home. That's all. It's just like, it's like getting a helicopter tour of your own city. Like, it's not
yeah.
something you probably would like think about doing, but I bet you'd love it if you did it. It's that kind of thing.
It's very Aquarian of you. You're like, let me see it from the outside. Let me
I want to see
let
it
me
from the outside. I
rise
might even
above.
stay up here.
We'll
I
see
hear
how
there's
that
no
works
rent
out.
payments that are due out in space, so that makes a big
Well, not
difference.
yet. Not yet.
Yeah, let BlackRock get up there and let's see how that changes.
Yeah, so that's interesting here. So well, let's think about, Jupiter. We're talking all about Jupiter. We've hinted
Mhm.
on Taurus. You brought up with Jupiter and Aries, being that Mars ruled sign.
Mm.
How can we add in the fact that, once Jupiter moves to Taurus, we are looking at more of a Venusian Jupiter.
Mhm.
How
Mhm.
does Venus as a ruler influence Jupiter? Would you think two benefics hanging out?
Yeah, Jupiter in Aries, I think, is a good energy because it invites and like doubles down on Jupiter's heat
Mm,
signatures. And I think that can be really valuable in the development of a lot of things. Of course, though, heat is going to bring in themes of conflict, and where Venus and Jupiter have something united are themes of moisture, and themes related to cohesion, social cohesion. So with Taurus, I mean, things in general are expected to become doubly temperate. I mean, May, the period of the like Taurian influence. I mean, it's going to be what, end April, beginning of May. I mean, like this is a time of temperate weather, seasonal weather, and so this sign has because it's ruled by Venus and now Jupiter's going through it, there's going to be a great deal of temperance that we can expect through these kind of passages. So it tends to be like when Jupiter goes into the earth signs, it tends to show good yields coming from the earth and also a good time to invest back into the earth. So, crop yield, I'm watching things agriculturally. I'm hoping that prices of grains, especially in, grain producing and exporting countries that rely on that economically, I'm hoping to see that we're starting to see some favorable conditions about prices of grains, prices of cash crops, and then also their distribution and supply chain networks. But it's also, Jupiter in Taurus is good for global fertility as well, especially if Venus's phase also indicates an increase in fertility. So when Venus is waxing or making an application to the sun, in either cases, that is increasing themes of global fertility. I think also because Venus is an inferior planet, Jupiter is a superior planet, there's this symbolic kind of theme here about respect extending between the upper powers and the lower powers. I think the upper powers, to me, I'm thinking about people that we would traditionally define as in power, but the lower powers, or maybe the more common powers is maybe the way that I should be phrasing it. Maybe the unique powers and then the common powers. That's us, populations, individuals who work to sustain a nation. So to me, I think having a benefic planet like Jupiter come into Taurus, Taurus is the planet that is associated with hard labor. It's the cow, that's meant to have the plow on its back and carry the yoke. So I'm hoping Jupiter in Taurus is also going to be showing themes related to unionization, better work policies, increased improvement in labor policies generally. But Venus is also an inferior planet. And one of the things that we are starting to see come back, or be repealed, I suppose, are child labor laws. And we're also starting to see the exploitation, because Jupiter is going to be pointing you to anything like Jupiter and Pluto should have this in common, that they like to point towards things ripe for exploitation, where some value can come out of it. And it's because the inherent nature of Jupiter is to find value everywhere. I mean, that's what it does. It doesn't, there's this old aphorism that if a crisis hits Jupiter, it's the only planet not to sulk about it, because it sees an opportunity to come through stronger. Every other planet has some way to whinge and moan, but Jupiter stands erect and says, it's a bummer, but I intend to make myself smarter, wiser, more powerful coming out through the other side of this. So there's an inherent desire to invest and see things kind of grow. But the problem is, like, I suppose when Jupiter enters into Gemini and Taurus, that the emphasis is back to back on inferior planets, and both Venus and Mercury point to children and people in young age, at young impressionable ages. So there's also a possibility that we may need to just keep, a renewed eye on what's going on with, child labor laws around the world.
Which is interesting to even think about. Like, I have never even thought about that, thinking about Taurus to Gemini to even Cancer, and just it being, that stretch of the inferior.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. And then, but Taurus points, like all the earth signs do, it points to the south. And so it also indicates that power is shifting from the east to the south. Now, I don't know what that means specifically, but we're moving from the east, which is Aries, and then Taurus is east by south. So there's still a little bit of Eastern influence, but the power and good luck tends to start moving toward the south. So that could be, we could be talking about more focus or, greater influence on the southern parts of regions, nations, cities. But I mean,
that is fascinating. Okay, I'm gonna hold that. Keep going. Wait.
yeah, okay. So, but that's what it suggests, is that there's a shift in either investment focus, moving into the South a little bit more. So what I would probably anticipate, for instance, is like Americans perhaps traveling. I think they'll always travel to Europe, for instance, but maybe there will be more increased interest in traveling to South America. And you can start to see then funding move from the East to the South in that kind of way. So there's just a lot of things you can think about it. I would love to get like a roadmap of like one airport or maybe multiple airports and the number of flights they have north, south, east, southbound, and how those change with the movement of the superior planets through the signs. Do we find routes that are obfuscated to the north when Saturn's in the water signs? Maybe we start to see things open back up when Jupiter joins in the water signs, because the water signs point to the north. So, it's an interesting field of study, but there's something in there.
Well, and it's interesting too, because it just depends on where you live. Because if you already live down south,
that's right,
you're probably not going. Like, I don't know if you're going to.
But even the southern
part,
well, even the southern part of your city, that's probably where you'll start to see if there's a place that, if there are 3 places where there's been possible development.
Yeah.
You should bet that the South is going to get the focus over the eastern part for Jupiter's ingress towards Taurus. It won't be universally true, but over the entire Earth, if we were to take all instances of this, there would be a nudge toward the South from the astrological perspective. So that's assuming that we could actually verify that in some way. But yeah.
So,
there are places in New York City, for instance, where the question now, we could in Brooklyn be pushing investment east, pushing investment south, or north into Queens. Like all these, there are areas and neighborhoods in each of these areas where you can expect things to really be driven. And my anticipation is that we're going to see property prices in the slightly southern part of Brooklyn start to increase more than the other areas. Yeah.
Oh, and that's the fun of astrology, right? You can just kind of sit back and wait. But, and thinking about that too, just thinking about tourism industries, and if there's might be a boom in, increased tourism in these southern locations, whether it's South America or just, the southern part of the United States, or, just whatever that looks like. And hopefully that they can get, reap something from that. Oh, that's fascinating about the South. I'm going to hold that.
Yeah, we'll keep talking. I'm going to look something up, actually. I want to just see what places are signified by Taurus, because there's there's a list of them. It's an old list, and I need to probably one day I'm going to try and work on like rebuilding this. And
is this a book resource that you have?
Yeah, it's Lilly. So he's kind of bringing themes from the couple hundred years before him. So Taurus points to let's see, what is that? 297. Sweden, Russia, Ireland. Well, Russia's going to be going through a lot. This may be a little bit of a blessing for Russia in a way, because they've really tapped out, I think, on collective goodwill around the world. And the question is, what's the end game now? And I wonder if Jupiter in Taurus is going to be a liberating force in some way, but I wonder what that means. Ireland, Switzerland, Iran. And then in terms of cities, there's a lot of Italian cities, German cities, but this is focused mostly in Europe. So it doesn't become useful for, other places in the world, but yeah.
I did think about Russia though, just because I know that Taurus is connected with them. And it's interesting, the last time when we start to look at, past transits of Jupiter and Taurus. And of course, this is always the Jupiter cycle of around, 12 years. So it's not common, but it's not infrequent either, So the last time we had Jupiter and Taurus was in 2011 and 2012, and actually that's when Russia became part of the World Trade Organization after this which is funny because the ceremony was in Switzerland. No, you said Sweden. Was Sweden? Yeah. Sweden was on.
Sweden and Switzerland are both. No, they're both.
They were both on there, and so it was like it was an 18-year negotiation to have Russia finally added there because they had to make a deal with Georgia.
You just tapped on something that's very useful in like mundane elections, which most of us are not working with like world powers to elect times and dates to do things. But yeah, if you were trying to negotiate a treaty, for instance, you wouldn't just want good astrology, you'd want to go to the places where Jupiter is. So that was, it's a really good example of like Jupiter being in Taurus and that being a place where, you know, things were brokered, you know, meaningfully.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That is fast. Well, and then you just bringing up to where the country itself, because I know that wasn't that part of the the situation in the last couple of years is like the trade going back between these Russia and the entire world.
Yeah.
And like I like the way you put it, like what's the end game here? Because there's
Yeah, it might be a reckoning. I mean, it sounds like that's going to be a Jupiter transit to, you know, that moment in time, and there's going to be some questions about what that looks like.
Yeah. Another
Yeah.
interesting thing that happened during that last cycle was the whole the Occupy Wall Street movement
Yeah.
that
I was
came
actually
up.
thinking about Occupy Wall Street the other day. I was taking a look at some of the astrology related to that. And it was an interesting time because it's like it was huge. I'm not sure what it accomplished. I don't know. People say, oh, it definitely had an impact. I don't know it. I think it was, an additional bucket of water, that's pushing up against the dike, and maybe there's, just more pressure as a result of growing appreciation about these kind of themes, socioeconomic themes. But, well, Jupiter in Taurus, though, has coincided with a lot of things related to markets. I mean, most of the time when Jupiter is in Taurus, what we see is an increase in general prosperity. But then when it enters into Gemini, there tends to be a crash thing. It's like there was something kind of grows in the couple of years that lead up into Jupiter's ingress into Gemini. And that's where it experiences debility for the first time in the natural zodiac, for instance.
That's
so
right.
It's like if you were to count from Pisces, and you can always do this where you start with the planet's own home sign, it's almost in a way like it kind of begins from there. It's its own like home space on the game board. And so once it leaves Pisces, Jupiter rules Pisces. And once it leaves Pisces, it then moves in through a very, two signs that are definitely pointing up and out, Taurus is really like down and in. I understand that as an earth sign, it does. But when Jupiter moves through, what the influence really seems to be, Jupiter is wanting to push out. And because Taurus has such a strong association with this season of spring and new life and new growth, there's a lot of compatibility there. But then as soon as Jupiter enters into Gemini, that's where that kind of blessing and boon really starts to hit downward. I mean, when Occupy Wall Street happened, this came out of that financial crash and crisis from 2007, 8, 9 that extended into 10, 11. Then we've got 11 and 12 coming around, and there was still so much unresolved from all of that pain, how much loss people experienced, and then by the time you come in around 2011, 12, 13, we're just starting to get on the outside of the biggest, sharpest points of that pain. But the question is, why did some people win out of that much global catastrophe? And that's a question we still have not quite answered about COVID. There were a lot of companies that did extremely well profiting off of global misery. So these are the kind of things that are important to ask, but Jupiter and Taurus is not the place for it. That tends to come up. Jupiter and Gemini, Jupiter and Cancer. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting with some of the things that you were saying earlier about Jupiter just not taking any type of kind of moping about things that happen that are bad, like pandemic life. We got Jupiter in Capricorn in its, fall position, which, the whole world and the economy is falling. But at the same time, here's those Jupiterian nature within certain corporations that like,
yes,
looks like an opportunity to
opportunity is Jupiter's favorite word. I mean, not just Jupiter, Mars and Mercury love that word too, but Jupiter's definitely got its ears open for it. Yeah. But some of the developments with Jupiter and Taurus have been, supremely positive as well. Like there have been so many like medical advances that have been made during Jupiter and Taurus. I mean, Taurus, because it's an earth sign, it's got a strong kind of correlation to the things that make up the body, the physical body. And so it's probably not inappropriate to expect advancements in human medicine. I mean, I think you probably would expect that more through the air signs, but It is what it is. I mean, Jupiter being in Taurus, we saw the World Health Organization announce the eradication of smallpox. That happened when Jupiter in Taurus. Jupiter in Taurus coincided with the creation of the iron lung. And that was, a heavy bit of machinery that did quite a lot of work, to make sure that there was, the ability to, breathe after sustaining, serious injury.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because the Jupiter and Taurus also coincided with the announcement of a polio vaccine.
Vaccine, yep. And then in the 20s, there was also the discovery of penicillin that coincided. But, when Jupiter came to Libra in the 80s, different things were going on. So there's a Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and there's Jupiter-Pluto, Saturn-Pluto. There's a lot kind of going on. Libra is the leader of the air signs, and in the physical body, the air signs correspond to the blood, because that's where oxygen is carried. That's not why. There's a lot of reasons for it, but in modern understanding, people think, oh, the lungs are the air sign. No, those are the lungs themselves are more watery. They're very heavy and very dense and very wet. But with the blood itself, that's where oxygen is actually carried and moved and dispersed throughout the body, and where it goes. And it was the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, Jupiter-Pluto conjunction that happened in the 80s, and Jupiter's passage through Libra that really started off the AIDS HIV crisis, which of course at the time was GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. And that was how it was originally named. And it was a disease that was in the blood, and being able to transmit that through blood or bodily fluids generally, not all, obviously. But so, there are themes here that correspond very strongly with public health outcomes with Jupiter and Taurus. We've got a lot of things that are kind of on the docket for us. We have COVID that we're coming through the back of. We've also got, maybe we'll have probably not a cure, but maybe new information about the vaccine. Maybe there'll be further development on vaccines, not just for this, but for other. What I also know about is that with Jupiter and Taurus coming up, an HIV vaccine is actually probably not far away. Right now, they're in human trials for it, which would be huge. That would change the lives of tens of millions of people, around the world, something incredible. So I guess I'm bringing this up to say that I'm anticipating there being some kind of movement on themes related to global health,
Yeah.
Oh, and something else that I, came across that I loved was that Survivor and Big Brother both started with Jupiter and Taurus. And the thing that I want to, and also I think MTV had something going on at the same time. I think it was probably with Jupiter going through Taurus that there was a big jump in the market share that MTV had begun to acquire. But anyway, the point is that with Jupiter being, a planet that's associated with fame and notoriety, and to have a new place where we're sourcing fame from reality, from everyday people.
Yes.
That could not be more Jupiter and Taurus. That was so wow, what a genius interpretation of it. So there might also be, with Jupiter's new passage through Taurus, a reinvention of the genre, or maybe even we'll start to take a look at how people on the genre are treated. Don't know if you saw the news, but that show Love is Blind.
I did see that.
Yes. So that kind of conversation, just for your watchers, readers, listeners, let's talk about it. Love is Blind is one of the most ridiculous marriage reality shows. It's like a game show, effectively. It is essentially that you, a number of men and a number of women, all of them straight, will go into blind dates, a series of blind dates. They're divided by a wall and they can only hear each other. And they are tasked with determining if there's somebody within this group of, I think it's 12, 18, 20, something like that, people on the other side, if there's one person that you'd like to make a commitment with, and the decision is to be engaged. One of you will propose to the other. Often the man still does propose to the woman, but it goes both ways on that show. And you meet for the first time in person after the proposal. And then they film you around as you prepare for wedding day. And so you've got about 5 weeks or something like this, I think, where the camera crews are following you around. And then on decision day, everybody comes to the wedding, and that's where you make your decision. I either do or I do not. And it's high drama, high stakes. And of course, it's like absolutely unlikely to develop the strongest relationships, but there are some examples of some, not very many, but a few of the relationships have lasted and been, filled with love and excitement. But some news has been breaking about, how the contestants on this show, so I have to call them, the contestants on this game show, how they've been treated, that they make they're separated from their spouses, sometimes days or weeks at a time. The cameras are always around. They're not often allowed out of their hotel room. Sometimes they're not given, proper food and nutrition. They may not even have access to water at all times. They might be, and the amount that they get paid is less than $7 an hour, which is less than the federal minimum wage. So like there are so many pieces of the puzzle where how reality television is filmed, how it's produced, where the money is going and not going. And then there was also, the hosts of the show received a lot of backlash for what could be seen as, a way of handling their charge, the people on this show, with not a lot of grace, not a lot of empathy, kind of some creepy things. I mean, Vanessa Lachey, who was one of the hosts, kept pushing for a Love is Blind baby. She wanted somebody to have a baby. They wanted a Love is Blind baby, inevitably, so that they can film a Love is Blind show. You can almost just, it's just where the money is. And you could tell that somebody in a marketing room said, this would be really good for us. And she just didn't have the grace to maneuver how to ask for that. So she's asking every couple who had a smile on their face when they're ready to have kids. It was weird, So there have been calls to replace them. I mean, these are the kind of things this is all Jupiter and Aries. This isn't a new thing, but Jupiter and Taurus is when we might start to see some change, or some real investigation into these things.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing to think about, like because part of the, them being denied like the basic necessities of what's required to even be there, like the food and water thing, but the pushing of extra consumption, because they're like, oh, well, there was never a time when my glass of alcohol wasn't filled to the brim, because they're trying to create these conditions. And why are these people on here anyways? Are they really looking for love, or are they looking for fame? It's like a whole, connection here. But you actually kind of cracked me up when I started to think about the concept of love is blind, because I was like, in my mind, I was like, this takes me back to my AOL days, way back. And the last time Jupiter was in Taurus before 2011, 2012 was 1999 and 2000, and that actually was the time that I was on good old AOL and in the punk rock scene. And I actually Love is Blind. I met a partner through chat, and I met actually a couple at different times, and they'd come and visit me, and you'd see them on the other end, and you're like, oh no, I had to pay. I had one guy come from Texas, he would not leave my house, and he had no money, and I literally had to pay him to leave my house.
Well, that's a lot of fun. That sounds terrible. I'm so sorry for
no, it's funny now. Yikes. But Jupiter and Taurus is my 7th house too, so
okay, so it was okay. I see what was going on. Money was going out partners at that time with that transit.
It's funny, but one did work out for a couple years, and then I moved across country for that. But just the concept of Love is Blind and like looking at it there is kind of funny to me.
Something else that happened during this time, it was in the 50s when Jupiter was moving through Taurus, that the structure of DNA was discovered. And then this last, that 99, 2000 period that you were describing, that was when there was the groundbreaking kind of work to sequence the human genome. So back in, I think it was June 2000, if I'm remembering correctly, that the initial draft of the human genome was announced. And so it's like, the DNA structure was discovered, and now we've got it mapped. I think now Jupiter moving into Taurus is also going to be a very good time to be investing in anything related to DNA sequencing. And if you work in a DNA sequencing environment, so if anybody's listening, they work for Ancestry.com, 23andMe, anything like that, now is a good time for further investments into your industry, what you're doing. And if you've got a new, feature to launch, this would be a good time to do that. I'm not quite sure what the relationship is between Jupiter and DNA and Taurus, but that their major advancements have happened when Jupiter's been in Taurus. It might just be something about creation of new life. Taurus long has an association with fertility goddesses, and DNA and fertility is there's a clear understanding what's going on there. Oh.
It's interesting because at that time too, there was a lot of, Uranus being in it. There's basically a light up of Taurus and Aquarius together, because Uranus was in Aquarius at that time. And even looking back at the in the 50s, in 52 and 53, that's when the North Node was in Aquarius too. So we were having eclipses.
Well, and Pluto's in Aquarius, so I guess we've got some repeating conditions there. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially from our, wham bam, thank you, ma'am, start with Jupiter and
Yes.
Pluto together.
Yes.
So just to run down a list, if anybody wants to kind of do their 20th century and beyond investigation here. So we talked about 2011, 2012, 1999, 2000, 1988, 89, 76, 77, 64, 65, 52, 53, 40, 41, and 28, 29 is in pretty much the last 100 years, if you kind of want to look back. I don't know if you had anything else to share in those times.
No, that's great. No, that's perfect.
Because I did want to share, because, one of the big things about Jupiter being in Taurus, we're talking about the Pluto activation, and there's a couple notable things going on. But of course, Jupiter is getting close to this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And so I was like, oh, well, let's go back to when Jupiter was moving through Taurus at the same time that Uranus was there. And so that was in 1857 and 1858. And they met in a conjunction at 29 degrees, the very last degree on May 22nd, 1858. But there's some fascinating things that happened around that time. Have you, have you looked into there?
Not specifically, and if I did, I wouldn't remember. I mean, it was what year? 1850?
1857, 1858. Because I have a couple examples, which I think you might find pretty fascinating.
Let's hear it. Yeah.
First of all, you brought up earlier about just Taurus being, the sign of the bull and the cow and and so what was founded was Borden Inc. Which Borden was a
milk factory, right?
That is like the primary dairy and food distributor, and who would go on to be the maker of Elmer's glue. You see the cow on
the cow right on the front. Wow.
Yeah, and Crazy Glue too, which kind of made me. It was kind of funny in my mind because I think about Crazy Glue as super stuck. Very Taurus. But it's like the start, right? This is the start of that company, and they went on to be at one time the largest producer of milk and pasta. They got into pasta, among other things.
Like you do. Wow.
Like you do. You got some milk,
you do.
Some pasta. Another thing that was interesting to speak to, the labor unions, right? In 1857, the National Education Association, which is the largest labor union in the United States, was created. And this is the union representing public school teachers, support personnel, faculty, staffers at colleges and universities, retired educators.
These are perfect
students.
caricatures. This is exactly what we should expect this next time around, maybe with, obviously more of a modern kind of hint to it, but wow.
And to speak to what you were talking about earlier about food, this is fascinating to me that, Ingalls law was created by a statistician, Ernest Ingalls, in 1857. And so this is talking about the economic relationship between the proportion of money that is spent on food based on your family income, because the more you spend on food in your income, the more it's an indicator of poverty, right?
Yes,
because and so this is like the whole basis of the proportion of how to kind of assess poverty levels and
Wow.
in the population based on these food consumption and how much money is being put into
Amazing.
it.
I did not know about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I was like, what? This is, and so when you're talking about this earlier, I'm like, yes, this is Engel's law.
Yeah, I promise we didn't compare notes before we came in for the
No, that's what I was. I'm holding my tongue the whole time.
Yeah, we all saw it. We saw you do like this.
I'm like, ooh, we'll get there. We'll get there. And so another, I mean, there's tons of things going on here, but I think this last kind of two things together is pretty fascinating. And that was the Panic of 1857. Have you heard about the Panic?
Well, I have actually, but I can't remember what it was about.
So, and I tried to do a surface dive on this. And sometimes my mind, when it comes to like economics, I'm like, just give me, where's the Cliff's notes? But it was okay. So it was basically, so it was like this financial panic that was created in the United States. And a little bit of it was going on in the UK too. And before kind of getting into what the crisis was, the interesting thing about this crisis is that it was actually the first worldwide economic crisis only because the telegraph had been invented in 1844. So it was the first time that like economic issues could be broadcast along the world and it had like something on the global sphere. So that was interesting. But it started with this issue of, paper money being backed by gold and silver.
Yep.
Because there was so much expansion out in the West, and we had all this, people were finding gold left and right. And so it was a big boom. But by this time, the gold was sort of drying up. And so there was sort of this rush of like, okay, well, we have all this paper money, but is it backed by, what? And one of the things that started to contribute to the panic was there was a ship called the SS Central America that was set to go to New York that had sunk with all this gold in it, basically. And
wow.
which I know you like looking at like set.
I love that kind of stuff. I love looking at that, but yeah, this is not the same panic that I thought it was. I'm not familiar with this at all.
There's lots of panics, but
there are a lot.
So many panics. So that created that started to influence the panic even more because they were waiting on that gold shipment. It never arrived. But at the same time, there was tension going on because a lot of money was being put into the railroads and startups of railroads because there were so many people moving back and forth, whether it was like expanding into the Midwest or, people going to do the gold rush. And there's also the tension between free soil and, slave territories that were going on. And so a lot of people were, banks were backing this railroad industry, and it was booming, but there was so many of these paper railroads that were financially funded, but never became anything. And so railroad stock basically peaked. But at the same time, shortly after, this is interesting because you're just talking about grain, right? So the oldest flour and grain company failed, and it began a market sell-off at that point. And because grain was so, to speak to what you were just saying earlier when we started the program about like the inflation that can happen with especially Jupiter in Aries and Jupiter in Pisces, right? Too. You were talking about like, it's like that whole start. So what happened is like all these farmers, especially in the Midwest, bought these properties to expand their grain production. And so now all of a sudden, before even getting there, you go from like 250, for grain to 80 cents. And people had all this land that was backed and they couldn't sell it for anything. It went from like $1,000 plot to you couldn't even sell it for like $10.
Right.
And so there was this, this drop that rearranged everything. And there was, a failure of the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company that had backed a lot of other banks with loans and mortgage holdings and they failed because of fraudulent activities and management. And then basically all the people out West were starting to really feel it because they didn't have any credit anymore. No one from the East was giving them credit. So they weren't able to buy anything, and, things just it wasn't generating anything. So, decrease of prices, land sales declining, all those things, because people had taken so much risk when, the prices were high and everything was going. And then, it went there.
Is it. Yeah, this is it. That's it. That's it.
And so what's interesting is that President Buchanan at the time then came in, right? Here's government coming in and being like, the root cause is this paper money. And so they withdrew any type of banknotes that were under $20, basically. Okay. And they tried to bring, the coin supply back up. But the last fascinating thing I'll say about this period before I get your thoughts on it is that coinciding with all this was the religious revival of 57 through 59 that started basically in the panic, and so there was this missionary, Jeremiah Lamphere, I think his name is, who he was determined to start a weekly noon prayer meeting for businessmen that would take advantage of the hour when businesses were closed for lunch. And so it started off with, he just put a handbill out there and a couple people arrived. And then a couple weeks later, more people were arriving. And then by like a couple months' time, because everything was so uncertain, and so people were turning to this higher power, right? Yeah. There were, his meetings, all the different basically every church was open for these business prayer times where, there was like the highest number of conversion of people to, Christianity.
Well, just a few years before, I'm very familiar with, like, in the 1840s, like the Millerites and a number of other like religious things that kind of came up. I didn't know anything about what happened in the 50s. Wow. So that'll be interesting. I didn't really look at that period. But I can hear at some stage in what you're kind of talking about, there's a Uranian theme in a lot of this about things like drastically going up, drastically going down, shudders and shocks and fear, and naming something like crazy glue,
crazy glue. I know.
Yeah. So it seems like there's probably a pretty big theme. I'll be excited to see how, these two planets touch things this time around. That'll be, I think, interesting to watch.
It will, because of course it can throw things out of whack and all around, but at the same time, it's a really powerful agent for just change and progress just in general. I mean, even the, Buchanan coming out and like being like trying to get the banks on board for more of the federal system, right? To get some sort of regulation there, because, this is a strong, like, free market type of energy. So it was kind of fascinating to think about, and just when because there's only going to be one pass of the Jupiter conjuncting Uranus, and that's going to be April 20th of next year in 2024. So, and it's interesting too, because it's followed by the start of the Sun Jupiter's synodic cycle on May 18th, right before exiting at like 28 degrees of Taurus. So it's like this last hurrah, hurrah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Very interesting. Well, we shall look forward to that then. We got a little bit of excitement between now and next year, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's the thing, is like history gives us something, but at the same time, there's always new conditions coming in.
Yes.
We've hopefully learned and gained wisdom from the past, cross our fingers there. Now, there's a couple things real quick to just talk about before we head to the end. I kind of wanted to pick your brain about thinking about two things, I guess. One is the Jupiter in Taurus making that opening sextile to Saturn in Pisces on June 19th. Because this is that first kind of Ptolemaic aspect since the conjunction back in December of 2020. So what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so so Saturn's in Pisces, Jupiter's in Taurus. There's no reception here. And sometimes people look at that and go, oh, there's a reception. To receive a planet, you need to be applied to. And it's like, I can't pick up the phone unless somebody's calling me. So you have to apply for me to be able to receive. And you also have to apply from one of my signs. So not only do you have to call me, but you need to call me from my telephone in my house. Otherwise, I can't receive you. All I can do is answer the phone and answer your question. So what we have here is a situation where Jupiter is calling Saturn and there's a conversation being had, but Jupiter is not in one of Saturn's signs. So Saturn's picking up the phone and is not necessarily it's not necessarily receiving Jupiter, which the thing with reception is it creates a dynamic where the applied to planet feels responsible for resolving the needs and concerns of the planet that applied to it. Okay, so that's the whole dynamic. But that doesn't exist here. What we have instead is that Jupiter calls Saturn and Saturn happens to be in Jupiter's home. And so there can be in some way Jupiter pushing a little bit of expectation on Saturn to do right, to deliver on what I've asked. And this is a reversal from what we had with the conjunction in Aquarius, where Jupiter applied to Aquarius and Saturn signs.
Yeah.
So these two are now leaning more into a positive aspect, which is sextile. And there is some harmony in the signs that they're involved with. Jupiter is in an earth sign. Earth signs are cold and dry. Saturn is a cold and dry planet. So this is, even though it's not a Saturn ruled sign, this is a good connection for Saturn. And it's one that I think actually could work well for Jupiter too. So here's what this I think means to me, is that whatever was baked in with that conjunction now is an opportunity for this to continue to be fed, grown, reconstructed. Let's ask questions about, we haven't reached the first square yet, so we haven't really reached the first crisis, but this is the first check-in point. It's like, it's like that 90-day
the 90-day probation
Exactly right. Actually, the square is probably like the 90-day probationary period. You're still on the new boarding, like, you've just come out of the onboarding,
you're learning the ropes
thing. Yes. And so now there's an expectation that you still have, dewy eyes and you're still super excited about everything that's kind of going on. Now is an opportunity. I think some really positive things could happen for people who have, when does this aspect happen also? What's the date?
June 19th.
June 19th. Right. So this is, I think, going to be an important aspect because a month later, on the 20th of July, Mars and Saturn come into opposition. And it basically kind of stirs up a lot of trouble in those same degrees. Mars will be in Virgo, Saturn will be in Pisces, 6 degrees each. And that's where that opposition is happening. Jupiter is going to be in a trine relationship to what's going on here. So actually, what we're seeing on the back of this Jupiter Saturn sextile, I think that's going to be positive, but I think it's going to be put to the test by external factors and maybe something pushing in a realm of impatience or conflict drive. That's going to happen a month later when Mars comes to opposition. So in my horary consultations, if I notice, for instance, that a new job is promised, for instance, on Jupiter's application to Saturn, or maybe I'm seeing, yes, you'll get the money, yes, you'll get the house. I'm also giving all of my clients some caution that a month later, there is a unique, vulnerable moment where trouble can get stirred up on whatever's happening underneath that sextile. So it's like good, but read the footnotes.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm like, of course we're sharing everything here, so I'm just gonna put up just thinking about that, because that's where so, because my other question that I was going to ask you, Wade, was thinking about Venus, who 2 days after that opposition you're talking about with Mars and Saturn is going to go retrograde. So there seems to be this interesting turning of events and maybe potential
well, yeah, there's a lot that's
there.
kind of going on here that's worth investigating and worth talking about. I mean, Venus has passed the square with Uranus, and then it's coming back to the square with Uranus. And actually, Venus's recent contacts in this period, she'll have been separating from a conjunction with Mars, which happens at the tail end of Leo. And because she's going really, really slowly, she doesn't make any other contacts, and then she retrogrades, and then she hits Mercury, who's peregrine, and not here. It's Mercury's in its own term here. You can kind of see, but when that conjunction happens, I believe it happens in the terms of Mars. But then Venus again hits the square of Uranus. So actually, during that entire period,
so
because
she never makes that conjunction, I don't think, right? Because she
turns retrograde, and then Mercury goes retrograde, right? So let's see.
So we're following along.
Yeah, let's go. And then Mercury's. Oh, you're talking about with Mars?
Yeah, because it
already happened. It already, I think.
Oh, yeah, much earlier.
Yeah, it happened earlier. So it'll be around like 22 Leo, something like that, I think.
Let's get our Oh,
I don't have this.
Mars is so interesting to me. Yeah, because they don't ever make it. Because that's kind of part of their cycle is they do this weird dance and then they back away.
Yes, that does happen with them kind of frequently. Can you go forward one more time?
And then
so this is in 2024. So this must be a situation where Venus is actually behind Mars that entire time, but then she slows down. Well, that's also going to be bringing some problems then.
Yeah.
I don't think that I'd looked close enough to realize that
well, it gets so close. And then they're like,
really close.
But
I always assumed they got together. Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
So, what that would be pointing to then is like, actually, this would be a period where I would expect a lot of relationships to be breaking down. Venus and Mars rule, between them 4 signs out of the 12.
Yeah.
So they rule 1/3. So 1/3 of the time, Venus is ruling the ascendant and Mars is ruling the descendant, or vice versa. So many times when relationship things or partnership things are being worked out, it's a 1 out of 3 likelihood that those 2 planets are the driving kind of influences. And if there's a desire to unite and then one of them turns retrograde and turns away, that can really upend things and cause things to turn upside down. So it's probably, worthwhile. And then Venus heads straight to the square with Uranus, which is, that's not be good for, supporting romantic development either. But this whole period, from the opposition with Mars and Saturn all the way back to when Venus and Jupiter come closer into their square. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Venus comes back in squares again. I believe there's 2 squares with your
there'll be so she's square. How right interesting. So she's squaring Jupiter basically at around the time of the Jupiter Saturn sextile.
Well, that's when she's direct. There'll be one before that as well. Because when she goes, there's, I think, one before that.
A square to Jupiter?
Yeah.
Because this is her direct one. And then there's one on August 22nd.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the retrograde one. And then there'll be one on September 16th when she's direct again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, during that whole period, it's never really a good thing to find a planet and their dispositor and square with each other. It suggests that the body of something and the mind of something are not united. You'll see that everywhere. You'll see it in relationships. You'll see it in government bodies. You'll see it in everywhere that humans organize. The head of the organization and the body underneath it will not be in agreement. So this will be definitely a period to watch.
Well, and what you were talking about earlier about the common versus the what's the terms you used?
The upper powers and the common powers.
Yeah. And then being at odds with one another here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, during this process, Jupiter's slowing down. It's very close to its station retrograde, actually. That station retrograde happens when Jupiter gets in trine to the sun. And you can see that that's just a few, Jupiter hasn't even left the degree. It's still in 15 degrees of Taurus. So this whole period is going to be like Jupiter stations in the degree that it squares Venus. And then Venus stations direct and comes back for that square, on the other side, a couple of days later, as you've already shown us. So, there's a lot to see and possibly a lot to expect coming off of this. But this is a period, I'm anticipating some some turbulence coming between end of July through the beginning of September.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right. And that's going to have, because Jupiter's chiming into all that. And so
of
we're going to see a
course.
lot of that Jupiter and Taurus action that we were talking about come up.
Yeah.
And so I'm already I'm already preparing myself. I want, you know what, I'm going to keep that optimism. I'm going to keep that good expectation. I'm going to be in the space of growth in my life, you know, just thinking about all the relationship stuff, because obviously that'll be for us, you know, all us fixed risings, you know, we're still in it.
I got a lot of fixed. I got a sun in rising and fixed signs. I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah, so we're on that Jupiter roller coaster that's coming around here.
Yeah, definitely.
So all right. Well, I mean, we've talked about so many different things, so many. Now I'm just like, okay, well, this is where the patience of Taurus settles in.
Yeah, right.
You just gotta wait for it to play out. And so now I know this is like a completely difficult question for people like ourselves that have many words for many things. But if you pulled into your resources of plucking out one word in your mind that really describes Jupiter and Taurus, or maybe even Jupiter and Taurus this time around, what's the initial thing that comes up?
I think what I want to say is temperance. Yeah.
I think that's a very good word.
It's one of my favorites lately. I'm a really big fan of temperance. And I think it's because maybe at many stages in my life, I haven't modeled it, but I also am not seeing it modeled, you know, around as fluently as it used to be. And I'm joking. I don't know that it ever was, you know, we had.
Yeah, it's a bit of a struggle for.
Yeah, it's temperance is we're given to excess. And so something with Jupiter and Taurus, I'm interested in this idea of forbearance and temperance right now is kind of what's on my mind.
No, I think that is that's a wise word. Wade.
How about you? What would you say?
Wade. Say that 3
times.
Yeah.
www.
What is I didn't really think about it, but let's see. That is a good one. The word that came out for me was hold.
Okay. Well, let's sit with it.
Hold. Well, and I mean, that might speak to a little bit of what you're saying about temperance, and like even looking at the past here, or like some of the like erratic, you know, movements, especially when we think about like Jupiter getting closer to Uranus. And maybe sometimes it's like maybe actually holding.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
It could be knowing what you hold and why, and the value of that hold.
Yeah, I was thinking about how that word is so Taurian because it can mean hold. It can mean hold. It can mean to hold, you know, to hold within, outside, without, you know, to support. A place where things are stored, a hold.
That's true.
Not a verb, but a noun. Powerful word you chose, actually. I think.
Yeah, I closed my eyes and it came from the heart.
Yeah, and also I'm thinking about Jupiter and Taurus and how appropriate that, you know, so many businesses end with such and such holdings, for instance.
Oh, that's right. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. So
well, you aced the test. You aced it.
Yay! Now I have this song in my head. No wind, hold 'em.
There you go.
No wind to fold them.
Yeah, gotta know when. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Know when. Oh my gosh, Wade. Well, this is so fun to talk about Jupiter and Taurus with you. Yeah,
thank you. I enjoyed it too.
Wait and see.
That's exactly right.
All right. Well, you know, where can people find you? What do you got going on?
Well, the easiest way for people to find me is to find me on my website, wadecaves.com. Everything that's updated and recent will be there. I'm also on Twitter at Wade Caves, Instagram at Wade Caves. I teach for the School of Traditional Astrology. And if folks want to get on my newsletter, which I agree, I think they should. I think people should.
I think they should.
You can just go to my webpage, and at the bottom there'll be a link to subscribe to subscribe. I would advertise where my newsletter is published, but I think it's just been picked up and it's moving to a new home, which is exciting. I just started it on this new place, and then I got a message like, "Hey, we'd like you to come join this." And or start this. And so I'm not announcing too much about any of it yet because it's not done. But so I'm just going to say, just find me on my website, and that's where, you know, my most up-to-date information about where my work is that can be found.
Yeah. And I will give a shout out to Wade in your recent webinars you've been doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining those. I've been having so much fun with it. I've got an outer planet series going on right now. So I've just finished up an introduction into like how to think about the outer planets, how I've been thinking about them. And then now we're going to do a Pluto and Aquarius, Uranus and Gemini, and Neptune and Aries series. But it's not all outer planets. I mean, we talk, I give horary demonstrations. I do live consultations on those webinars sometimes. I do mundane talks. It's literally just about everything. So yeah, if you are interested in learning, again, get on the newsletter. That's where, or on my social media. Twitter, I will always publish information about the webinars on Twitter. Sometimes I forget about Instagram.
That's okay. You know,
I'll get better about that. But.
It's well, you don't need to. It's like you do what you do. I swear the whole social media thing, and I say that in this space of the program every single time I record a program. I'm just like, social media, you know, I get it, but I don't want to get it. Yeah. So, you know, no pressure. Right. So, all right. Well, you know, I will, of course, have a blog post for our program here today, which will share Wade's information over at energeticprinciples.com. I'd like to say that you inspired me to do my own webinar coming up because I really liked your model, and I was having fun in your, you know, like just bringing things forward. And I was like, I kind of want to do that. So I started my own. I have a webinar coming up here on.
What's it about?
I don't know. It's on Mother's Day, and Mercury is stationing direct. So is that the right time? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. But it is, you know, I'm just throwing things out there, see what happens. But it's on overlaying the tarot with the natal chart. And so looking at esoteric associations with the tarot and decans, and how that puts an interesting spin on looking at natal placements and, you know, the stories and the wins and the struggles that people tend to go through, whether it's very publicly or just internally, and other people don't see it, because I find it very powerful as a tool. And so I want to share that with others. So if you're interested in such things, it's going to be on May 14th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And I'll have a sign up link here below, wherever you're listening or watching this. And of course, there will be a replay if you can't show up that day. If you got Mother's Day plans, or you're just busy, or you just want to watch it like 5 times afterwards, you know, it'll all be there. So yeah, well, you can find me on Instagram at Energetic Principles, where I'm there sometimes. I'm always sharing stories. I think I'm a story person. I'm like, get it in, get it out. This is what I'm seeing.
You might be,
you know, just in and out. This is my Uranus on the ascendant. Like there, I'm gone. There, I'm gone.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Well, I have a newsletter as well that goes out at the beginning of the month called The Heavenly Wind. So if you have not signed up for that yet, and you would like to know what goes on each month, come sign up, energeticprinciples.com. So, all right. What do I have to say here? Well, wherever you're listening to this, leave a review, especially on Apple Podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, tell Wade and I what you think about Jupiter and Taurus, and what you think it's going to bring, or even have insight to some of the other times that we brought up. You know, I'd love to hear more about it. Share with a friend, pass on the good word of the good word of Jupiter and Taurus. I think that is it. Wade, I'm so glad you were able to join me again on the podcast. It's such a treat to have you on.
I'm so grateful to be invited. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Well, good luck with Jupiter and Taurus, and especially Pluto lighten up the skies. We'll see you on the other side. And as always, may the stars be with you.